Okay, so apologies because I am very late for today's live. So apologies if any of you have been looking and waiting. Today is day 4 of our series on hamstrings. So we started day 1 talking about the hamstrings, where your hamstrings are, what they do. So we were talking about the hamstrings coming from underneath your sit bone. They're coming down through the back of the leg and they attach at the back of the knee on the lower aspect of your tibia, so underneath the knee. You have your calf muscle that comes up and attaches on the thigh muscle. So you've got that sort of little divot at the back of your knee area called your popliteal fossa, where they're sort of crossing and blending and giving it that definition. Also the fact that with your hamstrings there are 3 different slips of muscle, so you've got the biceps femoris section on the outside, and you've got your semimembranosus, semitendinosus section on the inside, which means that if you're flexing and turning and moving your leg around, you're going to find that the different areas will tension in different portions. Also the fact that because your tail attaches at the bottom, attaches to your hamstring slip, as we pull, it can pull you into that posterior tilt. So with the hamstring muscle itself, it is a knee flexor. So it flexes the knee backwards. It also allows the leg to pay out into extension. So as we contract the quads muscle into extension, it controls it. As we pull the leg back, quads obviously control the movement. From the hip side of things, your hip extension is from the hamstring muscle as well. So we get hip extension here, and then we have the glute that takes over. From a payout point of view with the back of the legs, as we're moving forward, this muscle is paying out as we increase range, and then we're using the hamstrings to come back up. So if you do classes like our Pilates classes and you're doing roll downs, you're using your hamstrings to pay out to do that movement. We start with the belly, but we're actually using hamstrings to come all the way back up until we're stacked, and then we stand up on top. Day 2, we talked about stretches for the hamstring, some releases. So we went through leg. We can do some trigger point releases, either wriggling the leg side to side or doing some releases so we can get some extension through the leg. And we also talked about how to test your range in your hamstrings. So if you are here in an upright posture and you extend the leg out, we want to know if you're actually true hamstring length or whether you're cheating by leaning backwards. Okay, so those of you who, if you're sat on the floor, then you need to be sat way back here, because to get up here you have to then bend the knees. You've probably got really tight hamstrings. Okay, so the other sections that we talked about for stretches are stretches with the strap, changing with the stretches and having the strap around the leg. So we're here, bending the knee in, coming across the body to get your ITB, coming open across the body to get the adductor component, so the hamstrings as it attaches into your adductor component fascia, and then coming into a glute stretch, because obviously your top end or your origin of your hamstrings is close in with your glutes. Yesterday we went through some standing stuff and some seated stuff. So if you're sitting, one of your first exercises might be your pelvis tilting, making sure you're actually upright from here. Your second exercise might be trying to get your leg a little bit straighter out in front of you on the floor. And then from a standing point of view, we discussed leg out and hinging here rather than curling or standing with a broom handle to get your stretch. Okay, so the feedback I seem to have gotten this week is that not many of us really knew that because the hamstrings are over 2 joints, that you can be loose at one end and tight at the other, or that, you know, if you're stretching it, you really want to stretch in the 2 different areas of the hamstring, and also that the hamstring can work with rotation. So you might find you're quite good with one leg one way, but you might find you're not that great with the other. The other thing you need to be aware of is that your hamstrings can be different lengths. So if you can get range through this hamstring, you might find your other hamstring is just really stiff. So I'm not that great on my right leg, and I can probably get to here and I can feel my hamstring's not that happy. But on my other leg, my hamstring's very happy and I can get way down to my foot, relatively speaking. So we're looking at your inconsistencies. Now, what does that mean with hamstrings and injury? It means quite a lot if you have tight hamstrings, because if your hamstrings are tight and they're pulling you backwards, I might just nip and get the spine for a second. So give me 2 ticks to get my spine. So if I'm looking at my mic back in, if I'm looking at my spine here and I'm looking at the hamstring attachment at the bottom here, and if my hamstrings are tight, it's pulling my pelvis around. So if I'm standing up and my hamstrings are sitting there and they pull me around, oh sorry, there's no issues there, if they're pulling me underneath, then what's potentially going to happen is as I'm pulled underneath, I'm pulling at the spine at the back here, and I'm creating flexion in my spine, which means that I'm going to be prone potentially to injury in my spine. So we see all the footy players and they do their kick, or they're standing and they're doing their kick and they're here, and you can see that they're in a real curl. So if their hamstrings in that position there are really tight and they really pull, if they've then got that extra kick in this position here, they're going to feel that they're jarring through here. So in that hamstring, if it's tight, it can then give you back pain, okay? Similarly, if your hamstring's tight and it's your adductor, and you actually tighten your adductor, it's potentially going to pull into the hip joint, and you might find you actually end up with hip pain because you're squeezing in tight, and when you're trying to move, your pelvis is tilted underneath you. You have a tight adductor, and it means the range in your hip is then decreased. And then we see people with pain on the outside of their hip because they're trying to compensate and they're trying to get movement going, and nothing's really working that well. Rather than getting the range through the hip here, they're trying to achieve it, and the whole thing moves. So in terms of your hamstrings, if you are inherently tight with your hamstrings, potentially it means that you have decreased range in your leg range. So like I said, your kick is going to be deficient because you're going to be tight through the back and here, and your length in your hamstrings is causing an extra pull in the pelvis. That could have a knock-on effect where you're getting back pain, and then it's causing a problem with the pain or the discomfort. It can also have a problem where it's causing you problems because you're tight through your adductors, and then you might try and compensate by using some of the other muscles to achieve the movement that you can't manage because of your tight hamstrings. So things about, do you need to release them? Do you need to strengthen them? Do you need to stretch them? Are they weak? Are they tight? Are they long? Are they short? A lot of that is really a management issue. You can have tight hamstrings that people can function with on a day-to-day basis quite happily. You can have long length hamstrings that people find problematic. So it really is up to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and getting the right managing strategy in place. We find a lot of people will say, oh, my glutes are tight, I'm going to release them, or my ITB is tight, or my quads are tight, or my hip flexors are tight, I'm going to release them. And same thing with your hamstrings, you can do some hamstring releases as well. So, you know, a common one that we'll teach is having a ball under the leg, and you might actually just, I don't know if you can see that ball there, you might just do a little bit of release where you're actually releasing along the ball as a basic one, or if you have the ball under your thigh and you're seated, problem is though, with most people who have tight hamstrings, we'll also find that the hamstring is weak. So what happens is you've got a weak hamstring that's also very short. So when you then release it and you're stretching it and you're trying to get some length in it, you're still left with an inherently weak hamstring, and you still are going to need to do some then exercises specific to strengthen up that hamstring, because again, hamstrings are what power us and what we need when we're walking. As we stride out, we need length in that hamstring to be able to then walk on it, and the hamstring to be active to be able to then pass through. So if I'm in a curled position, without falling over, if I'm in a curled position and I'm in that sort of swayed curled position, I'm not actually getting leg extension at all. Similarly, if my hamstrings are tight, I might find every time I stride out, I'm actually pulling on the back because I don't have enough range. So I'm getting that pull on my spine as I move. So if I then stretch the hamstring, I might have more range, but I also need to use and get some strength in it. And we need to work out why the hamstring is tight. Why is the hamstring weak? Is it tight because it's compensating for something else? Is it tight because it's holding on and that's what it's trying to do? It's trying to support the spine, or it's trying to do something else? Is it tight because, you know, you might actually have an ACL deficiency in the knee? You have your ACL, so your cruciate ligament that stops the knee coming forward. If you have a deficient ACL, your hamstrings are going to want to work to stop that movement, so they're going to compensate by tightening up to prevent that fall backwards. So, you know, it's never as simple as my hamstrings are tight, can you show me something to do to free up my hamstrings? Sometimes it is, and that's great. The thing is, if you are getting problems where it's causing an issue for you, it might be some back pain, it might be some irritation, it might be that, you know, you're inherently sore. We'd want to make sure that you're not leaving yourself open for things like a tendonitis, where, you know, there is an irritation on the insertion of the tendon, or on the outside where they insert, or up into your ischium where they insert. And again, if there is some irritation there, stretching it, you might find actually makes it worse. So inherently, you need to know what you're dealing with. You know, it's very easy global statement for us when we're looking at people and we see people in class and we say, oh, your hamstrings are tight, and so we automatically think, you know, we need to get length and we need to get stretched. We need to work out why they're tight. Is it tight because you've got that sway posture and you spend all day sitting, in which case you're not doing anything to give them length? Are they tight because they're compensating for something else? Are they tight and they're weak? So then we start trying to move them and everything's shaking because nothing's strong, and we're trying to make you work, and they just don't want to because they ain't happy. So strength-wise from your hamstrings, what can you do? There are heaps of things that we can work with hamstrings. One of the basic ones that we see when we're working in class is some of the classics like bridging. Most of us will do a bridging exercise where we are using the quads. So with your quads, I'll just line myself down here. If I'm doing like the classic bridging exercise where I'm coming up, I'd want to feel it in the back of the legs to get that stretch over the front of the hips, when most people might do it where it's quads and you'll see that they push and they shunt. We want to get it where it's curling and you'll see then that your hamstrings are working. Okay. Some of the other classic hamstring exercises that we see would be leg extension. So if you're working in your quadruped position or you're down here, you've got a leg extension component where, if I swap legs actually, so you can see as I'm lifting the leg up, I'm actually using the hamstring as an extender. So I'm using the extension component of the hip, and then I can use the knee flexion component to do my hamstring curls, and then I can use the hip extension component again with glutes to get that working as well. Okay, so there's heaps of things that we would generally do, definitely in class. If you're in a Pilates class or you're doing general exercises, your kicks, so like a hamstring knee flexion, pushing your leg against the wall. So if I'm standing and I've got my foot against the wall and I'm using the push of my foot. I'm using and active through my hamstrings here. Classic would be your squats, as long as it's not quad dominant, you're getting some hamstring activation through there. So quite a lot to take in for this week. Basically, where are your hamstrings length normal for you? What is normal for you? Is normal for you causing a problem? If it isn't, and you're functional and you're able to do whatever you need to do, and that's how you live, and you're not wanting to have better length, better flexibility, better strength for any reason, and it doesn't pose you an issue, great. If you're finding you are struggling because now it's a problem reaching down to put shoes on, you can't reach the floor anymore, you're struggling and it's starting to irritate your back, you're feeling that you're tight, you're trying to get legs, or you can't do a hamstring stretch and everything's there, or you're struggling and you can't actually sit because you can't get up without having to bend the knees. If you're finding that it's impeding what you're doing, then that's maybe when you need to start thinking about taking some action and doing something proactive that's going to be different for it. So hopefully this week has given you a little bit of an insight into how your hamstrings function, what they actually do, how you can test them to see what your length is in your hamstrings, different ways of actually stretching them, whether you're lying down, sitting, standing, different ways that you can incorporate that into your day-to-day. So even though we didn't really touch on it too much, if you are up and about, you could just do a stretch. If you're out in the park, you could get your leg up on the park bench and stretch. Obviously my hamstrings aren't too bad. It could be that your stretch is down on a lower stool or on a step. It doesn't have to be that you get the mat out at the end of the day and you do 10-15 minutes of stretches, because that's not what gets people better, and that's not what improves what you're doing. What improves what you're doing, what improves what you want to do, and it's a big part of our management strategy if we've got clients that we see, is you want incidental stuff that you can do during the day, whenever you remember, whenever's convenient for you, and that it's easy. You're just standing in the shopping queue and you can stick your foot up on the trolley and do a hamstring stretch. You're waiting for the kids to pick up from school. You're waiting for the kettle to boil and you can do a quick hamstring stretch. It's things like that that make things, or you get to the edge of the chair if you're in the commercial breaks, or on your mobile phone at work and you do a couple of stretches while you're doing things there. They're the type of things that will actually give you that range and that improvement over time, not spending 10-15 minutes 2 or 3 times a week. So think about, if you do want length in your hamstrings, say your hamstrings are really tight and you think, you know what, I want a bit more flexibility. Think about improving flexibility as something like going and trying to train for a 10K run. You're not going to start here and be flexible. Okay, when you're training for a 10K run or a 5K run, if you don't run, what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to go walk. Then when you've walked, you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to walk, and for a minute or half a minute, I'm going to run, and then I'm going to walk for a minute and a half, and then I'm going to run for half a minute, walk for a minute and a half. Then the next day, what you do is, over that time period, you say, now I'm running for a minute and I'm walking for a minute, running for a minute, walking for a minute. Then from there, you go a minute and a half and walk for a minute and a half and walk. And then gradually over time, you increase your tolerance so that you get to 10Ks. Now that might take you, depending on your training pattern and what your previous baseline of fitness is, that might take you a month. It might take you 3 months to get to 10Ks. However, once you're at 10Ks, you don't need to do that 5-6 times a week. You can say, okay, my fitness level now is at 10Ks. I'm just going to run twice a week, 3 times a week, and now you're maintaining. Okay? To get to that point, you actually needed to do the training. Once you're at 10Ks, you then only need to maintain. The same thing is going to be with your stretching. If you want to increase your hamstring length, you're going to have to be doing stretches daily. You're going to have to be doing the changes that, remember we were talking about that creep. If we can get from here to here, we're going to tighten up. If we leave it 2 or 3 days, we're still at that point and we tighten up. If we want to increase it, we stretch and we'll come back. And we stretch again tomorrow. We get a bit further and we come back. We go a bit further and we come back. So over time, we get to that length. And if we want to get to that length here, once we're there, then we can maintain that. So that's when we can say, look, I'm just going to do stretches 3 times a week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going to make sure I stretch and make an effort to stretch. And then you'll keep that flexibility. Same as when you're doing the run. When you're at 10Ks, you'll be able to keep that because you're maintaining it. If you're in the beginning phase and you want to increase your flexibility, you have to be doing something daily. And this is where most people fail. They're not doing enough on a regular basis to actually get that improvement that they're after. Same thing happens with training, same thing happens with, cardio, same thing happens with fitness, same thing happens with any type of exercise or health regime. To kickstart you, same as losing weight, changing diets, getting more fit, getting more toned, you need to be doing something regularly. So, look at 5, 6 times a week, 4, 5, 6 times a week, something that is regular. Once you're there, you can go to maintenance mode. Before that, you need to put in the effort and the work. So if you're just doing a little bit and expecting it to change, a little bit and expecting it to change, you're not going to get the long-term results that you're after. And I think that's why it's important if you can then switch it up so it becomes part of your daily routine. It becomes something that's just ingrained to you to be able to do. So if you're sat on the couch and you're watching the telly and you're not doing anything, you wriggle forward in the commercial breaks and you stretch your hamstrings. And you've done 2 or 3 stretches in the commercial breaks where you were sitting anyway. Or if you're sat in the commercial breaks and you stick your leg up and you stretch your hamstrings this way, you can do some flex and point and you've got that range. You swap the sides over, do the other side. You can do these quite happily on the floor. You can just have your leg out in front and out to the side. Don't do the hurdle stretch. The hurdle stretch is just going to put pressure on your knees, so don't do the hurdle stretch. But you can do your hamstrings. You can do it where you're in the straddle and you're doing your hamstrings in the straddle position. So make it part of your day-to-day where it's easy. It doesn't have to be hard. As soon as we start making it hard, that's when we stop doing it. So make it easy for yourself. Don't overthink it. Think, when can I do my incidental hamstring stretches? Can I put my leg up on the counter if I'm waiting for the coffee to boil? Can I, or the kettle to boil? Can I stick my leg up on the vanity while I'm brushing my teeth? Can I, when I'm putting my shoes on, instead of actually sitting and doing it this way, can I try and reach down and tie my shoelaces instead of always coming this way? Can I stretch my hamstrings just against a park bench and come out and reach? Come against a park bench, come out and reach while I'm waiting for the kids or while the kids are playing. Once it becomes incidental, once it becomes easy, once it becomes part of what you do on a day-to-day basis, that's when you'll get the results, not when you have to go and get a mat out and get this out and get that out and make an effort, because if it's too hard and you make it too hard, you're not going to do it. So hope you've enjoyed it. It's been day 4, I think, today of our hamstring series. Those of you who've been watching along, if you have anything that you would like us to cover, I think we've got some suggestions like neck pain for sit-ups. Another one was knee pain. What can we do about knee pain? Another one was tight quads. Another one was stiff ankles. So if there's anything that you think that you would like us to cover that's easy within a sort of remit that we can do in masterclasses, we're very happy to do so. And thank you all so much for joining me, and hope you've enjoyed the series. Take care.